shortage in that. In general, the US has too few students going into engineering, technology, math, and science. So big data is the fourth opportunity. And then the last opportunity that we identified to raise US growth in the long term is in education and skill development. It might be news to you, but the US educational system, I think, has two extremes. It has some of the best universities in the world, Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Stanford, where I went. The public state university system, universities of Michigan, Wisconsin, and so on. But at the same time, the primary and secondary school education is not great. And it's the same story as infrastructure. 30 years ago, it was world class, the best in the world. But what's happened is that lots of countries in Europe and in Asia have really raised their game in education, and the US has more or less stayed the same. So right now, we find that in the international test scores, the OECD does a test called the PISA score, measuring math, science, and literacy, or reading skills, reading comprehension skills of 9th grade students in countries around the world. I actually don't know where India ranks in the PISA studies, but you can go onto the OECD website and find out. But the US does really poorly for the richest country on earth. It's way behind most European countries and the Asian countries, maybe in the middle of the pack of the 60 or so countries that the OECD ranks. So that's rather embarrassing. And working with companies, which I do in my capacity at McKinsey, companies say, we get these graduates and they can't do problem solving, they have poor communication skills, they have poor teamwork skills, they are terrible at analytics. So it's really starting to affect worker productivity. So one of the big opportunities is to really improve the US educational system, both at the what we call the K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade level. So 12th grade is a high school degree. And also at the 2-year, what we call technical and vocational schools, the community colleges. So the K through 12 level, it's really about targeting some of the poorest schools in the country that are often in inner cities, in urban areas with large minority communities who are living at the US poverty line or below it. And it's really putting more investment in those schools to raise performance of those students. After high school, the US has an interesting lack of people going into these 2-year technical degrees. So there's been a big focus on everyone going to college, to a 4-year college. And it used to be taught in US high schools that you could choose a track that either went to college preparation or what we called vocational training, where you could learn to be a mechanic or a carpenter or an electrician, or for women, a nurse or a typist, secretary, etc. And that was gotten rid of in the 1980s. And now there's a big lack of people with those basic skills. In fact, there's such a large shortage of welders that one executive at an oil company told me that they're hiring welders, those are people working on oil rigs, $150,000 a year because it's so difficult to find. So there's an acute shortage of skilled tradespeople. And it's also been, I think, bad for a lot of individuals because not everyone is cut out to go to a 4-year college. And so they go to the college, but then they don't do very well, and maybe they drop out. So they enter the workforce without any tangible skill. And so they don't do very well in terms of getting jobs. So it would be really a win-win both for the students to give them skills that they can use in less time, and it would really improve the overall effectiveness of the US labor force system and give companies, especially manufacturing and construction companies, the skilled labor force that they need. So altogether, this paints a big opportunity for the US, but it does require both private business investment as well as government investment to make these things happen. Right now, I think we're at a crossroads, And it remains to be seen to what extent the US will capture these opportunities. But it seems clear from what we know today that if we don't take explicit action, the GDP growth is slow. And it's not likely to pick up. We're not likely to see the same type of growth that the US saw from the whole post-war period after World War II up until this Great Recession, that we could be on a permanently slower growth path, and that's something that I don't think anyone wants to see. So I remain hopeful and maybe slightly optimistic that the US will actually do what it needs to do. There's a growing public debate and discussion about these issues, and I think a realization that we may have to be much more targeted and proactive about economic development, and we can't just assume that the economy magically grows and creates jobs and it all works out. So I'll stop there and would love to hear your questions.
Is consumerism costing US? Should that not be addressed and see that there is a change in the habits of its citizens?
Well, it's true that the US economy is driven by consumer spending. About 70% of GDP growth comes from people spending money. And this you saw even increase higher before the financial crisis because people were taking out debt to buy more. So they were taking out mortgages to buy bigger houses, car loans to buy automobiles, credit card debt just to go and buy whatever, a TV or a vacation. And that has been cut back sharply because now, first of all, banks aren't lending. The standards of what it takes to get a loan have gone dramatically up. And people are realizing their incomes aren't growing, so now they need to repay this debt that fueled consumption before 2007. So I would agree that there needs to be a shift in the US economy away from so much consumer spending towards more investment in things like infrastructure, education, things that create long-term capacity in the economy. Right now, it's happening to some extent. So the household saving rate has increased over the last 5 years. It means that people are spending a little bit less, saving a little bit more for retirement and education and other things. Whether or not there will be a cultural shift, I don't know. There has been a backlash very much against inequality. And at the height of the boom, careers on Wall Street in investment banking and private equity were generating huge salaries and like ridiculous amounts of money for a few people. And I think that there is a backlash against that. So we'll see. I think that this shift will take a while, but there's also evidence that the younger generation of Americans, people like yourself, we call them Generation Y or the millennials, actually have different values, and they're not buying houses, they're often not buying cars, and they seem to be more content to live in smaller places and have less. So it may also be a generational change as the baby boom generation retires and grows old.
Can you share your knowledge on the US health bill? Because in the view of growing veterans in US, it's quite a great challenge for the US. I mean, the government spending on the health bill, it's costing US very much, and it's a matter of concern for the government. Can you tell us any alternatives? Because India too has got such problems as of now. I mean, the sort of health insurance schemes, what they are in the US, they're being implemented in India, in this particular state as of now. There are such insurance policies to be taken over. I mean, can you tell us whether there are any alternatives to tackle the current form of problems faced with US health bill?
US healthcare. Look, I'm an economist, and makes no sense whatsoever. It's completely irrational. The McKinsey Global Institute did a study about 5 years ago looking at how much money the United States spends on health care adjusted for health outcomes. And we found that compared to other OECD countries, the US spends $700 billion every year more with no improvement in health outcomes. And then we looked at each part of the system, so where was all the spending? And the sad thing is, it's basically across the entire system. Part of it is the cost of drugs and pharmaceuticals. Part of it is the amount paid to doctors. Part of it is the use of medical technologies like imaging machines that are used, they're owned by doctors. So doctors prescribe an MRI or a CAT scan, and then they happen to own that machine, so they're making money as they prescribe you to go there. And consumers don't pay for any of this, essentially, because the insurance company pays. So if my doctor tells me to get an MRI for my knee, I say, okay, and I go do it, and I don't even know how much it costs, and I see only a small portion of the bill. So this has led consumers to consume whatever their doctor says. The doctor makes a lot of money by prescribing these things, and then the insurance company pays. So this is how healthcare spending has gotten completely out of control. What needs to happen is a complete shift in the system. I think that the Affordable Care Act is a step in the right direction. The main benefit of the Affordable Care Act is that it now extends insurance to individuals who can sign up. So traditionally in the United States, your health insurance has come from your employer, which is great, except a lot of people are unemployed, people retire, young people who want to do startups can't afford. So now the Affordable Care Act has opened the door for lots of individuals at a reasonable price to get health insurance. There are also measures to promote over the long term better decision making in the healthcare system through electronic medical records and more research on the evidence of what's most cost effective. But overall, it's not an overhaul of the system. It sort of changes at the margin, so I think it's positive, but I think the US is going to continue to spend a lot of money on healthcare, which does open the door. I was talking last night to a group of CEOs who were asking about medical tourism in India. And if people start to have to pay for their knee replacement, you better believe they're going to start looking at the cost of the surgery in the United States versus other places.
Why is US not investing much on renewable energy sector? Advanced countries like Germany are producing energy, 50% of energy from renewable energy.
Well, look, the US, the question is around renewable energy. Why isn't the US investing more? It was part of the stimulus package at the start of the recession to try to promote the use of renewable energy. And there was some money allocated. And then there was a high-profile solar company that got this federal money that went bankrupt. That wasn't good. But the fact is, the economics of renewable energy make it uncompetitive with natural gas or coal unless there is a government subsidy or a mandate. So renewable energy is being developed in the United States, but it's only in cases, there are some states like California and Maryland where I live, that require that utilities have, say, 10% or 15% of their energy coming from renewable sources. And when that happens, then in some parts of the country, large-scale solar is competitive, and in other places, like along the East Coast, offshore wind farms and windmills are being used. But it remains true that this is only economically competitive for a utility if they are either required to purchase it or if there's a subsidy. And in fact, the shale gas boom has lowered natural gas prices so much that it's really hurt the renewable sector because natural gas-based power generation is so much cheaper. But that said, it is happening. And another thing that's happening on the margin is people installing solar panels on their rooftops. So that's become a big craze. We talked about US consumer spending. Here's a positive example. And it's become a little bit of a craze. I see it in my neighborhood, certainly. All sorts of houses suddenly have solar panels on their roof that provide electricity when it's sunny to their home, and then they can, in some states, sell extra power that they've generated back to the grid. So that is actually just being done because people care about the environment and want to reduce their carbon footprint, and that's taking off in a big way. But at the utility scale renewables, it still is a matter of public policy requiring it, because a company on its own, it just doesn't make economic sense.
Madam, good afternoon, madam. Thank you for coming IIP. Madam, I want some doubt, madam. Why, now India is facing trade deficit. Trade deficit.
Yeah.
And balance of trade and balance of payments. Some economics from India, they are telling they are not using innovative ideas. They are not using innovative ideas. According to India, innovative ideas are not following, some others will tell. But USA, there are some innovative ideas they are following. What are the ideas they are following? Plus, recent Microsoft also he said that so many jobs are
Yeah.
recession. Why the jobs coming recession?
Yeah. Well, the question is on the trade deficit and what are ideas, I think, to reduce India's trade deficit. And I think it comes on at least two different sides, right? One is how can you increase exports? Work that we've done looking at India suggests that the IT high-tech service exports still can grow further. I know you have very successful high-tech areas in Bangalore and Chennai and Hyderabad and Gurgaon and other parts of India, but there's even more opportunity to expand that, both in the US market, but even more in Western Europe. And then when you look over to Asia, say Singapore and Japan, other Asian countries have very few imports from India. So there's certainly more room there. I think that another related area that India is starting to excel in, well, two in manufacturing. One is in pharmaceuticals, and Indian companies have become very competitive globally in pharmaceuticals. You could expand that to life sciences, medical devices, biomedical devices, more broadly. So that's a whole area that could build on India's strength in science graduates and university graduates coming out in biologic and other sciences. So there's a whole sort of life sciences field. And that's actually really a big possibility, because when you look at how populations are aging in the United States and Japan and Europe, old people we know require a lot more medical care. People your age probably never go to the doctor. Neither do I, but when we get old enough, we're going to start going there all the time. So aging populations are going to create enormous demand, so life sciences and pharmaceutical. India has also become quite competitive in automotive. Tata Motors is now actually setting up factories in other parts of the world, which is a very positive sign. But I think it's a matter for India's government now to think strategically about what other clusters of industries do you want to develop. Because when you look at manufacturing across India, we drew a map of India and put a red dot for every place there's an industrial cluster. And it's just spread kind of evenly across the whole country. But what you can see in IT is that there's a real benefit of creating an economic cluster. So it's one or two or three cities that get a lot of investment, both from India and foreign companies coming together. And then you get the skilled workforce